My name is Thomas Michael Swinson. I'm an assistant professor of native culture at Arizona State University. My work is historical. I'm a historian. I call myself perhaps an indigenous materialist. I center indigenous texts and histories in relation to sort of, to dissenter, master narratives, that have been written against or in contrast to Native people. But this presentation, right? This panel consists of three very compelling presentations about the Native revitalization and revitalization and education can and will play an important role in Alaska Native language futures. Yogi Berra said once, predictions are hard, especially about the future. And as a historian, I know firsthand about the power of language in a historical way. So, my work is, I'm always turning to the past, right? For instance, our greeting Chamai is a word intoned with the most sincere intentions, right? Hello, greetings, right? It conveys the utmost friendship, right? In my work, I learned that when the Alutiiq were in California in the early 19th century, this word was passed on, of course, to the Southern Pomo, who use it today as a greeting, as their greeting. So 200 years ago, when the Alutiiq when we were enslaved, right, working as part of the Russian Empire, this word, right, what linguists would call a traveling word, right? For me, it provides a history of goodwill formed between two peoples, right, outside of that dominant narrative, right? Does that make sense, right? So while Alutiiq people were not allowed to, by and large, write history books, right, about their experiences in Northern California at the time, right? This word alone provides us a way to understand these cultural spaces that were happening, and so to think about. Do you think? I mean, that it goes to show that this word transferred between two people, or two different peoples. Would they have known that 200 years into the future, I'd be talking to you about it right now? And so, as a historian, that's kind of the way I'm sort of linking this discussion about the future in language. And so we have three compelling presentations, and the first I'd like to introduce to you today is Lance Twitchell, assistant professor of Alaska Native Languages. And his presentation is Alaska Native Language Revitalization, Changing the Fabric of Our People. Thank you. Come on up.
Right. Nischish Hoyana Hawa. Shukwa Ayah Twasaku. Hasiko Hasyo Katangi. Ayah King Hati Yehu. Adaya Hatnahu. Yidataya Twasaku. As the Klitko has the E-Day. Watan ya denaima. Nischish away, Itlitko has. Nischish Shagun. Kwasakua ya, Itlitko has the Ani. Achawe ataya Hatuwa. Tesla Edach Aya Yukatangi. Achawe Achit. Hasta the Shia Tina Hatati Achilko has Achawe Akwati Danawak, Ankadakzin, Bunkapuwapan, Jaktin du, Panakawaya ko achati wuchtati, Ach tundatani dat ayach yati, Hast du sechwa achnuch, Achawayach tuasagu, Ach techtach aya ach yuchatangi adatawech de katasiko has yuchatangi. Gonna cheese plain away to cut Johanna Hunki Yan, Ach Kuashitibu, Ha. Yejagach name had the Hunki Yan, yes, Ha Hashiko has gonna cheese. Thank you guys. Thank you for coming. Switch a little bit. I wanted to just try to make a little bit of my grandparents' language. I learned that phrase from one of my elders and teachers, Kehinak John Martin. The reason I wanted to do this is I wanted to speak to the ancestors of the people whose ancestral home this is. This is a place where I grew up, so I know this area. But to be able to speak about some of these things that are really near and dear to my heart, I wanted to speak straight to their ancestors. And in order to do that and to talk about these things, I said, this isn't even going to be me. I'm going to imitate my grandparents, because some of this stuff is a little bit hard to talk about. Some of this stuff is a little bit hard to think about. Those of us who work in languages, we're often used to some pretty small audiences, you know, and so we stick together and we think about ways to build these movements up and to make them bigger and to make them stronger. And so at presentations like this and panels like this, one of the core themes is to hold each other up and just say, you know, I know what it's like to be out there at the forefront. I know what it's like to be lonely at times, because maybe not everybody is doing this in your area. And I know what it's like to feel like you're up against a wall. But I firmly believe that our grandparents have prepared us for this. This is what we were born for, was this fight right here. This is the one thing that we're really in jeopardy of losing over these next 40, 50 years especially. We're going to see a completely different Alaska. It's going to go one way or the other. And you know, it really comes down to choices for our people. So I'm going to run through some slides and talk about some things. I want to acknowledge some students that went through a class that I taught called Alaska Native Language Revitalization. We ran as a very small class, something we'll run regularly. Nate Tumala and Susie Edwardson were my students there. There'll be a list of resources at the end where a lot of these ideas come from, and a lot of this comes as well from conversation. So in a lot of other ways, it still isn't me talking to you. I'm just telling you other people's ideas and really trying to continue to relay the message that I've been given by those who are working in languages and by those who are teaching me and trying to encourage me to push myself and to do things out there that will hopefully unite our people. And I just want to acknowledge those who are working in languages, who are my colleagues and my teachers and my mentors and my inspiration. This talk is dedicated to Jim Crippen Sr. One of my dearest colleagues is James Crippen, and he recently lost his father, who's a good friend of mine. He's one of my buddies. And so I just wanted to think of him at this time. As far as, you know, I do most of my work in the Tlingit language. My Tlingit name is Hune, or Du'ani Kaudanu. My Haida name is Ejau. My grandmother comes from Heidelberg. My grandfather comes from Haines and Skagway. And my father's people are the Yupik from Akiak and the Sami from Norway. James Crippen does a tremendous amount. Most of my work is in Tlingit, and I'm a translator for him. He's this real high-end linguist. I see some linguists in the room, and sometimes linguists can't talk to people, so my job is to listen to the linguists and talk to people and say, here's what we're trying to do. And I also want to recognize Alice Taff, who's one of my colleagues and really one of my mentors. It's been a lot of fun to do work with her and to see the commitment that she's had to languages for so long. So with that, we're just going to get into sort of what's the inspiration behind this whole message, this whole talk. And the first one comes from Khat. His name was mentioned, I believe, yesterday. His English name is Charlie Joseph. He's Khat Wan Khan. So I'm bleeding off the edge a little bit, so I'll go ahead and read both. This was at a gathering of elders in 1981 where their mission was to speak to the future. What's going to happen? And it was a real back and forth. This was one of the first speeches at that event. And he said, self-respecting people is what we call everyone. It means to be an honorable people, but it literally means you respect yourself. Even from long ago, we have placed our grandchildren high above ourselves. Yes, we cherish them. Even those things we treasure, we used to offer up to them, to those who are our grandchildren. This is why we made these songs their vision. And so, next, Wushjapo Ish visited my intermediate Tlingit class, and he was really just making a fantastic presentation to the students. One of my goals has been to bring elders in and to make them a real part of the university and what we're trying to do there. And there was this point where he looked at, he's just really going, and then all of a sudden he just looked at everyone. He said, all of the big leaders across the United States, what did they fight for? Cochise, Geronimo, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull. They were fighting for their way of life, as you were doing right here. And it just sunk in. This is our resistance, is to continue to speak and learn our languages. And so that's the sort of spirit that I want to try and invoke before we start talking about some of this material. So as far as an overview, the things we're going to cover is a need for revitalization. We'll cover sort of these things right here. And then we'll go through 3 broad categories that I call doubts, dreams, and realities. And the whole sort of idea is to get us to a point where hopefully we feel some momentum, we feel some urgency, a stronger sense of maybe vision and purpose in what we have now. It's not to say that we lack those things, but really we need to be filling up our classrooms, we need to be filling up our homes with language, we need to be making sure those who speak are not lonesome and those who are learning are not feeling like they can't accomplish the goal of a living language. So I like to look at maps, I like to draw on things and just think about boundaries. And so these are our language families. We've seen lots of maps of, we've got our languages, those languages we can really consider like independent nations. They're all trying to do work for their own language, but we're in language families as well. We've got Eskimo Aleut, Na-Dene, Haida, and Tsimshianic. A lot of the map work that I've goofed around with is based on all the work done at the Alaska Native Language Center. They're very generous with the work that they do, and it's a place that a lot of great information is flowing through right now as far as being able to access information like this. So the point of showing this in terms of language families is saying, there's these big families and they're going to work together. There's all these languages and we're going to work together. We've got to get this thing where we're truly united in these efforts. Because a lot of these things get sort of pieced out and we start fighting for dollars, we start fighting for attention, we start fighting for these different things. And really, it should be, we're all in this one boat. What's working for you? What's not working for you? Did you try this? Did you try that? What kinds of things are going on in your institutions? What kinds of things are going on in your community and in your homes? Briefly, this is data that's always hard to track, but the point of showing a slide like this is you can look at percentages of your native speakers, and you can look at your population of your native population within a given language. And these are always estimates, but it gives you an idea. And some of the things that you look for are zeros or 1% or very low numbers. Southeast Alaska is about 1%, no matter what language you look at. And so Tlinkit's the largest population in Southeast Alaska, and then Haida and Tsimshian, but they get pretty small numbers. On Tlingit, we're probably down to 100, 150. It's really hard to track how many people are speakers. And with a lot of our generation of speakers, there are a lot of people who can speak but don't. And then there's a lot of people who say they can speak, but they have a really hard time. So we try not to be too judgmental about what's a speaker and what isn't. But at the same time, it's good to do these sorts of inventories within your language, within your community, and say, what kind of resources are we dealing with? Because we're at the point now in Southeast Alaska where we could start naming communities where there are no speakers. We could start naming clans within our tribe where there are no speakers. And those become true threats, because names start getting lost, and place names start getting lost, and people start getting very lost. So if we were to take a look at the percentage of speakers on a sort of color-coded map, dark blue is really solid, dark red is not, and then there's a couple of communities that are probably running into the black, even though we have people who are speaking those languages and learning those languages. But it's good to just sort of get our mind around some of the terminology around language revitalization that we're going to use for discussions like this. So now we'll move into the value of languages. And we heard a little bit about this stuff today. And so this is a quote by Richard Littlebear at a conference called Saving Indigenous Languages. And he says, but why save our languages since they now seem to have no political, economic, or global relevance? That they seem not to have this relevance is exactly the reason why we should save our languages, because it is the spiritual relevance that is deeply embedded in our own languages that is important. The embeddedness of this spirituality is what makes them relevant to us as American Indians. And there's a really important thing in here, which is saying if we're going to be looking at language revitalization, we have to develop or sort of reinstall our own value systems. Because we're going to hear, how is this going to pay the bills? How is someone going to get a job? And how, and it's our job to transform not just universities, but to transform our entire society so that we're thinking in bigger terms than what's for sale and what isn't. And so these are some of the things we are going to have to deal with as warriors for our languages and those who are interested in revitalization. So now we'll move on to a concept called language shift, and this is a concept that you really need to just be aware of. And all it means is you're shifting from one thing to the other. And it's at the core of it, that's what it means. So I'll call attention to, it's adapted from what was developed in Australia, which was an Aboriginal downward spiral of language depth. And so we think of this thing just sort of spiraling down like water. It's limited language use, and limited exposure to the language, reduced language knowledge and fluency, lack of confidence in using the language, increasing reliance on English, limited Alaska Native language use, and then the cycle just repeats as we go farther and farther down. So one thing that happens is people get disconnected from their own language. They feel they lose confidence in it. There's a lot that happens spiritually, mentally, and psychologically that creates a ton of barriers that are really tough to pass. And these barriers exist in the social levels as well, which are things we must be aware of and we must be conscious of if we're going to reverse all of these shifts that we've been looking at. And then again, to continue, a Mohawk quote, if we do not retain our native languages, we will lose one of the most direct links that we have to our cultures. This knowledge of our culture is lost to us. It is lost to all mankind, for all. So, we've seen the cycle of languages worldwide, and so there's almost every language is endangered. You've got thousands and thousands of languages that are narrowing down to really just a handful. But one of the things that's happening is certain languages might sort of evolve into other languages, but that is absolutely not what would happen when we talk about indigenous languages. If they go, they're gone forever. And those are very important things to understand so that we can collectively talk about what's on the table. And I believe it's our very identity, it's our very It's the mental, spiritual health of our people. And then another good quote to think about from Jox. I and most Native people I know hesitate to embrace the radical view that without our language we are no longer Native people. But on the other hand, I fear that without our languages, it is all too easy for us to become cartoons. So things to think about, within our languages we find the reasons why we do certain things. So continuing along, defining our purpose. So one of the things we can do is we can come up with terminology or adapt useful terminology out there so we can just sort of assess our languages. Where are we at with our languages? We could track exactly where we're at so we can figure out exactly where we need to go. And where we need to go, it's a very easy answer. We need speakers, we need languages in the house, we need children who speak it without hesitation. I was in Hawaii a month ago, and I'm not bragging. But I was in Hawaii and I was sitting in a classroom that's an immersion school in Hawaii. The entire thing is Hawaiian. And one of the most magnificent things I saw is the teachers talking in Hawaiian and the kids are there. And there's probably about an 8th grade class. And then I notice these kids that are being bad and talking while the teacher's not listening. And they're talking in Hawaiian. And that was fantastic. I was like, if you're going to be bad in Hawaiian, And so that's what I wanted to see. And when they would speak back to the teacher, they weren't hesitant at all. It was just a language that flows through them. And so a lot of us, for me, every time I speak Tlingit, I often have to start constructing it in my brain. And then eventually it'll start to flow. But if we're in an environment where the language is just used more and the language exists on the land, then we're in better shape. And Randall Tetlichi is a Gwich'in elder. He came to visit our campus last semester, and he visited my class. He said a really important thing. He said, we're at a transition right now. We see a lot of our old timers that are passing away, and we get scared. We think, look at all this knowledge that we're losing. Look at it. He said, we don't ever lose knowledge. He says it's native knowledge. He says it goes back into the land. He says, you go out on your land, you speak your own language. You're going to wake up and you're going to suddenly know something. And so we're going to teach some of these concepts to our students, that we could teach them grammar, we could teach them fundamentals, we could teach them phrases, but it's a spiritual practice that's going to put language back inside. That's the glue that holds it all together. To the point where you're going to say, you're going to get up there to speak, and you're not even going to know what you said, because those aren't even your words. And those are fundamental concepts in Tlingit country, is that if you want to gain knowledge, you go out to the woods. Again, John Martin, he said, Hajita Sawati, Hakosti ya Askwan. It was the tree people that gave us our culture. It was the forest that gave us our culture. We didn't just have it. And it's this connection to the world that we're going to see in the language. So going through, we've got stage 1, which is safe. It's the first language of an entire community, for the majority of that community anyways. It's used in every aspect of daily life. Stage 2 is endangered. It's the first language for some. It's the second language for many others. Its use is limited by availability and comfort of speakers. Stage 3 is Morava. It's the first language of only a few people, and it's used mostly for ceremonial situations. The language comes out, and then it goes away. And that's exactly where we're at in Southeast Alaska, is we're in that phase. And then you've got stage 4, which is dying. No living birth speakers, very few speak, often with simplified grammar, content, and function. The language is really just symbolic. And then stage 5 is extinct. There's no remaining speakers. There's some pockets of students who study texts or recordings, and all cultural concepts are translations. And so we want to be careful. We don't want anyone to feel hurt when we come up with some of these terms, so we can certainly be flexible about some of them. Extinction doesn't necessarily mean it's gone forever. But there's some people who prefer it's sleeping. There's some people who say it's died, it's dead. And there's other people who just say, it's gone away for a while. So, it's up to you where you're at with this terminology. But it's good to understand that there are levels, and we've seen it worldwide. People who are studying what's going on with languages, we're not alone. And even if you have a whole bunch of people who speak, We're all going through language shift right now, according to some of the conversations I've had with people. And some are in a better state than others, but we're all still in a similar sort of situation where we're either, we'll take a look at what's going on with language shift in a second. There's three things that we're going to try to do, and it's good to sort of have common terminology, because I hear language preservation a lot. And preservation for me just means like we're going to put it in a jar, we're going to put it on a shelf, or we're going to just keep it the way it is. And I don't think any of us want that. I think we all want revitalization. But as far as what kind of terminology are you using, for some communities it's putting an end to language shift, saying we have a lot of speakers, we have it through all across generations, we have it in the home, we have it in the school. What we need to do is we just need to stop the takeover of colonial languages with indigenous languages. We just need to stop it. That's not to say we're not going to speak English. Of course we are. I was at the first meeting for the formation of the statewide Alaska Native Language Council, and I see some members here. And some very important political person came on the television and said, this is a really good idea. He said a few other things about being good, and he said, but don't forget about English. And it's like we're going to just suddenly just stop using English. It's not going to happen. And then this person said, thank you for having me on your show. It was a very weird little thing, so I don't know what kind of show we were on. So anyways, ending language shift, it's for speakers who, you've got fluent speakers, you just want to put a freeze to that and just focus on balance, making sure we're maintaining balance, we're focusing on the health of our own language. The second is revitalization. That's for languages that have small numbers of fluent speakers, and you're trying to reverse language shift and definitely increase the number of speakers. And then revival is for languages that have no fluent speakers remaining. And so it's trying to revive what's there. It's a resuscitation of language. And you need to know where you're at, because you're going to have different techniques with each of those things. If we looked across in our language families, we can rely on one another and say, well, what are you guys doing? How are you motivating your population? Because at this point, all of our conversations, at least the majority, the overwhelming majority, should focus on what we're doing with our own people. We're the only ones who are going to control this. And we heard that again this morning. Superman's not coming, Wonder Woman's not coming, Captain America doesn't care. So we're the ones, we're the heroes, we're the ones who are going to initiate this and make it happen. The other thing we try to control is doubts. And so we're always on the lookout for doubts within our students, within ourselves, within our programs, within our administrations. If I thought about across Alaska, if you look at how much money comes in for Alaska Native languages, how much of that money goes to people who are speaking, how much of that money goes to people who are actively learning. And so those are some of the questions I think about. But some of the problems that you can have is because you have inadequate funding in most places. Canada's on to something because they're getting more and more funding for language revitalization, which is it's a great question to ask, because you could say there's a lot of people who showed up here who worked for the federal government and said, knock it off, and they didn't say it very nice. And so there is, if you want to think in that mode of thinking, you could follow a trail of receipts and say somebody did this, and now we had a land claims, but we've never had a language claim. I don't think we have. And so maybe we're moving in the right direction, but we have to keep in mind that funding is not the answer. It's people and what people choose to do with their own time. That's the number one thing that you think about, is getting more and more people to be convinced that this is how we don't save our languages. We speak to our ancestors and we understand how to survive in this world. Our languages are what are going to anchor us to this world and to this place and through a variety of very difficult storms. So some of the things that, problems that can derive from lack of funding or planning or commitment. And these are things to just be aware of so that you can, we're not trying to always just call out the problems, but say we've got to know what we're looking at so we can roll our sleeves up, solve these problems. Language problems that are low quality or offered just as a token. This is what I'm seeing in Southeast Alaska with a lot of our schools. They'll say, oh, we've got Tlingit in the school. If a student wants to show up an hour before school starts and take it themselves, And it's not a regular part of the curriculum. It's certainly not any part of any standardized testing, which is continuing to assimilate Native people. And so it's offered in here and it's offered there. But how can it stand equal if you've got GERs at a University of Alaska system? Make one of them an Alaska Native language class. Why not? It's a place. Is anything going to get more place-based than that? No. The other thing is insufficient hours allocated to the teaching of the language. I see that at UAF, there are the Yupik and the Nupik classes and their Gwich'in classes. They have 5 credit classes. That's fantastic. So you're really upping the hours. You're trying to really push your students to commit to spending that time in the language. Shortage of adequate language resources, lack of human resources, unstructured programs and curricula, which are confined to the teaching of isolated vocabulary, like colors and numbers, and not getting people to communicate. And this last one is really important. It's the illusion that a lot of cultural activity and pride means that your languages are just fine. Because I was first sort of studying this argument that there's language revival and there's cultural revival, but they are not the same thing. And and someone could say, well, language and culture are connected. I would say, absolutely. But it is a lot easier to learn songs and to learn how to dance than to learn how to speak the language. And that's just a factual thing, and we need to be aware of that. Because in Southeast Alaska, we have a cultural revitalization, and it's wonderful. And it opens the door for a language revitalization, but it's a different type of movement. So as far as dreams, we need to build our own schools. I don't think the schools are going to be flexible enough, not at this moment, to do what we need to do to ensure that our children are speakers. We need to develop a vocabulary so that workers in an office can use the language on a daily basis. We need to understand the value of being not just bilingual, but multilingual, so our children can look at something and they're thinking about 3 or 4 different solutions at the same time because they have 3 or 4 different thought patterns in their own head. And then equality, from Michael Krauss, who's just done amazing, amazing work. There is no such thing as a primitive language or inferior or superior language any more than there is such a race. So we've got to really find that sort of belief system that speaking native languages is somehow moving in a backwards direction. And I've heard that sort of incorrect logic. I think I'm getting short of time. We can look at Leanne Hinton's 8 Rules for the Master Apprentice Program. These are fantastic. I'd be happy to share them with anyone. It's just ways to stay in the language. It's always a challenge to just stay in the language. But there's ways to do that. There's lots of methodology to rephrase, to correct, to allow our students to make mistakes and to play with the language and to own the language. In reality, just because our kids know our language, that doesn't mean that they're going to be united with their ancestors' thought units, but they are going to be on their way. So we have to see the incremental steps. We have to see that we have to do this on our own, and we just have to make a stand. If somebody is right there dying, we're going to run and save them. We're not going to wait for somebody to come and save them. We're going to look at this thing and say, there are tactical solutions that we can take that are going to keep our language going. I've only got a couple things left. One is just some quotations just to continue to get us thinking about these things. Nature contains the creatures, plants, and elements of nature that have named and defined themselves to my ancestors and are naming and defining themselves to me. My ancestors made my language from nature. When I speak Yupik, I am thrust into the thought world of my ancestors. We're going to keep that in our hearts. Oscar Kawak, I don't have time to read the Tlingit, but this was a video that Alice had taped and was translated. And this is how I'm going to bring it. This is how I'm going to bring it at this time. Let the young people hear it so that the young people will all hear it. We don't have to just be white people. We are Tlingit people. It's good it was included in it, however. Let us keep bringing it forth. It's nothing shameful. It's our big thing we're going to carry. Our ancestors followed that. They lived according to it. That's what saved them. That's why we're here today. And so In closing, I just want to say, I went to, we're in Hawaii and I'm just looking at this volcano, and my wife runs and grabs me, and I come back and I see this whole group of kids, and they went there to sing their songs to the volcano and to make offerings. And it was incredible for me to see that connection. It's language that ties people to place, that ties them to themselves. Being monolingual kills a sense of this collective identity of what we are, because you go back 2 or 3 generations and they're not going to be able to understand you, and you're not going to be able to understand them. And what we need to look at is when our children are killing themselves, it's an extension of people who've tried to kill us for a long time. And it's our languages that are going to pull us back together. That's the one thing that we can do. That's the one thing that we can hold on to. And no one's going to stop us. And the only thing in our way is the decisions we are making, what we're doing with our time and energy. Lastly, whether the dark side, this is a picture of child-sized handcuffs that a friend of mine showed me, and it was for people who were speaking their language when they were little. And so we have these realities as well. Learning our languages and revitalizing them, it's a spiritual healing. It's the type of healing that our people are in great need. Chish.
Thank you, Professor Twitchell. Up next is Lawrence Kaplan, Director of the Alaska Native Language Center at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. His title of his presentation is Revitalizing Native Languages, Comparisons Between Alaska and Other Situations.
Okay, hello, and good to see you all. It's been an interesting day here for Alaska Native Languages. Hard to remember something as interesting as this that have to go a long time back, starting with the Alaska Native Language Council, and then I'm really glad to be in this session with my colleagues Lance Twitchell and April Counselor. When I was starting, to think about this, I thought, well, when people think about language revitalization, they're always wondering, what are people doing elsewhere, right? What is working anywhere in the world, and how can we use it? Or can we use it? And what do we do about this? And so there are lots of examples of language revitalization programs, and which fit, language revitalization can fit under the broader topic of language planning, which is efforts to guide the use of a language in a particular society. And so I thought, well, let's look at some comparisons for, let's see, I guess it's visible. It's sort of off the screen. Let's look at some comparisons for Alaska and see what we can come up with. And but to start with, to what extent can we even compare endangered language situations? Is this of value? Every language situation is different, very different. And I thought, well, just look at mainland Yupik, the lower Kuskokwim River and the lower Yukon River. 2 Yupik areas, the same people essentially, but in very different situations. The lower Kuskokwim still has villages where little children are learning the language as their first language, and the lower Yukon does not. Why is this? I can't answer that question easily. Other Alaska Native languages are in very different situations from each other. So then I just put up a few ideas. What types of things can account for these differences? History of contact. The North Slope had the whalers, who had a huge cultural impact there. Much of it not positive. The Bering Strait area had a gold rush, and Fairbanks had a gold rush. The people of Fairbanks played host to a motley crew of gold miners who came into the area. All of these things affected the culture and language of the native people. The actual culture of the group that we're looking at. Are they urban, people in urban situations, rural situations, the overall size of the population? The mainland Yupik people in Alaska are the largest native group. So they can find people to marry within their own group more easily than a very small group where there's only a few dozen people. Well, maybe you don't want to marry one of those few dozen people. So then you're marrying out into a different language group, which affects the situation. The size of the population, and within that, the number of speakers, what the community, how they see their language and where they want to go. The history of education and schools in the area, how much television they have and how long do they have it, because the television, as we know, in many homes is on many hours during the day, and it's pumping out English. It's not pumping out native languages, except in a very few fortunate places in the northern circumpolar region. In Greenland, there's television in their language, and in some of the Canadian Arctic. But anyway, looking at all these different things that can affect the language situation. So there's caution needed when making comparisons, but still, you want to do that. It can be very useful to find out what's happening elsewhere. And there's lots of literature now. It hasn't been around all that long, but for the past few decades, people have been writing books and articles on language revitalization and language planning, which is going on in North America, South America, Europe, even Europe has indigenous people. France has, we think of, well, everybody in France speaks French. Well, sort of. There are Basques and Breton people who are speak a Celtic language, and others. There are Germanic languages in France as well, Catalan. So even these European countries have, indigenous groups that are trying to maintain their own languages. Ireland, Irish, Scotland, Scots Gaelic, many situations around the world to look at, all different, and yet often in the same situation, right? We're talking about relatively small languages, relatively small groups of people, in the case of Native Americans, relative to large world languages. And people surrounded by a flood of English, right? Trying to stay afloat, trying to keep their language afloat in a sea of English, just a huge flood of English. And how do you do it? So even if the language, the grammar is different, the sounds are different, the people look different, and they eat different food and all the rest of it, they're still can be in a similar situation. They may live in France, they may live in the United States, they may live in Peru, and the majority language may be Spanish or French or English or whatever it is, but often, the situations are similar. So we're tempted to compare. And I thought, well, I'm going to talk about Hawaiian a bit. And why Hawaiian? Well, for one thing, it's something I know about. I did a sabbatical in Hawaii in 2009 to learn about their language revitalization efforts, which are known far and wide. Lance Twitchell just talked about those a little bit and showed you a couple of slides. Hawaiian language efforts have had some very positive results, and that's why people go there to look at their language programs. And quite a number of Alaskans have gone there. I know of a lot of people. And recently there was just this conference in Honolulu, which continued on the Big Island in Hilo, Hawaii, to experience and visit the immersion schools and learn about their programs. And so Hawaiian, actually, when I was there, I remember meeting a rather prominent linguist who was teaching there, and I said to her, well, these are probably the best language revitalization programs in the country in terms of their results. And she said, in the world. So I said, oh, okay, well, that's kind of significant and maybe true. And so, you know, we'll look a bit at what they're doing. And I don't use the word success, by the way. If you hear me use it, you can call me out when I'm talking about Hawaiian language, because my Hawaiian colleagues wouldn't like to hear success. They have to keep on working. They're having very positive results right now, I would say. But the next generation has to do it, and the next, and the next, and the next. Every generation has to train the next generation and keep the language going. So success means victory, we've won, sit back on your laurels, we're done, That's why I don't use that word. Okay. Let's see. So I just put up some history here, and you know, I'm not going to go through all of this, but Hawaii. One point is, you know, I said that it's hard to make comparisons, and Hawaiian language has such a different history from any North American native language. The islands had, well, they may have had dialect diversity. They have very little now. It's one language in the whole state of Hawaii, one indigenous language. And the missionaries came. They began writing, and Hawaii claimed a very high rate of literacy in their language. They said that, I don't know, they had 80–90% literacy in the Hawaiian language. There was a lot of publication that went on. And here I have claims that Hawaiians became the most literate people on earth by the late 1800s. It was the language used in courts, schools, government. Hawaii was a country. It was a country that could be recognized as such by Westerners, you know, who wouldn't have recognized Native American groups in the same way, but it had a royal palace and you know, a royal family, and they sent ambassadors to the court of St. James in England, and they did all these things that countries were doing. And still, they, you know, of course, the monarchy got overthrown. There's a very good movie about this, about Princess Kaiulani, if you ever want to watch a nice video that tells the unfortunate story of the Hawaiian monarchy. But there was a lot of publication, a lot of writing in Hawaiian, and there still are you know, that information is still available. But language suppression began especially when the United States annexed Hawaii in the 1890s and overthrew the monarchy. And then gradually there was a decline in the number of speakers. And so now today there are really just a handful of native elder speakers of Hawaiian. That's not where the language revitalization is. The elders, you know, when I say a handful, I really mean that. But the language revitalization, of course, is with children and young people. Let's see. So the Hawaiian Renaissance began, and what happened was a whole, well, there was a realization of culture and language loss. The way the Hawaiians saw it, they needed a holistic cultural revitalization that would include language. Language was an important part of it, the glue that held it all together. But their language revitalization also involved music, traditional crafts, arts, dance. Hula had been discouraged, that was revived. Hawaiian was made an official language of the state of Hawaii in 1978. You may say that's a symbolic thing, but it's a very important symbolic thing, you know, a symbolic gesture to have Hawaiian be an official language. And in some ways the Hawaiians had it worse than we do because it was against the law to use the Hawaiian language as a medium of instruction in schools. You could teach it as a foreign language, as if it were a foreign language, as if you were teaching French or German, but you could not teach a class in math in Hawaiian. That was illegal. So they had to get the law changed. And schools were once again allowed to do that. And the language nests began. Language immersion preschools were started, borrowed from the New Zealand Maori Kahanga Reo, the Hawaiian Punana Leo language nests. Started with little children and then moved into immersion schools. And Larry Kimura was one of the movers on this. The people were very interesting. How did this language revitalization movement come about? It started at universities. And people were taking Hawaiian language classes, and the way it was explained to me, a group of them got together outside of class and they said, okay, we're learning our language, you know, the way you learn it in school, but we want to activate it and make it a spoken language. And so they started speaking it and using it outside of class. And then one couple within the class got married, and they thought about starting a family, and they said, what's the language of our family going to be? Hawaiian. And so they had to change their relationship. All of us have relationships to other people that may be in English, maybe in Yupik, whatever language we have. But changing the language can be a little complicated because you get used to one language. So they changed their language and they raised their children in Hawaiian. They took the plunge. They took the risk, quote unquote. What risk is there in teaching your children Hawaiian? Well, as you know, in Alaska, some people are worried. What about English? You need English to succeed. You need English to get a job. We all need English. What risk is there that a child growing up in Alaska today will not learn English? The big goose egg, right? Zero risk. What risk was there that a child growing up in Hawaii would not learn English? Zero risk. What risk that a child growing up in Hawaii would not learn Hawaiian? Big risk. That's where they put their efforts. And of course it's the same in Alaska. You know, will children learn Tlingit? Big question mark. Will they learn English? We won't even talk about it. Okay. So the Hawaiian immersion programs began. They start actually with infants. They take little infants into the immersion school where they're in cradles, they're in diapers, and they're doing things they do with the kids but they're doing it all in Hawaiian. And then it goes on to toddlers, and then K through 12 immersion school, and then university degrees. You can get a BA, MA, up to a PhD in the Hawaiian language. And here's some immersion, kids in the immersion program. And this is their, by the way, at the end I am going to talk about implications for Alaska. I'm talking about it a bit, but I'll get more to that. This is their motto, let the Hawaiian language live. So besides teaching Hawaiian, they want to activate those who speak it so that they use it. Because one of the first things that happens with endangered languages is that the speakers themselves don't speak it. And so when everybody's worried about teaching it to other people, the very first thing is to get the speakers speaking, right? Again, they can, and I think Lance mentioned this, there are people who can speak but don't speak. And so from my observations, and I'm giving you, that's what they are, my own observations, there's an unwritten rule. Hawaiian speakers must not use English with each other. They've got to speak Hawaiian with each other. Because if the speakers don't use it, who will? So what they do is they've gotten rid of the politeness rule that says if there's somebody in the room who doesn't understand Hawaiian or Yupik or Lutik or whatever it is, you have to speak English because that person over there can't understand you. Well, they've gotten rid of that rule, and we're probably all familiar with that. If you follow that rule, then you speak nothing but English, unless, for some very small languages, two people would have to go lock themselves in a closet somewhere to speak their language. If nobody else, people who don't hear it aren't supposed to, people who don't understand it aren't supposed to hear it. So, when I'm present, if I'm with a couple of Hawaiian speakers, they're speaking in Hawaiian, and if I don't understand, well, I'm free to go out and learn the language, because everyone's welcome to learn Hawaiian. If you want to put out the effort and do it, then you're welcome to do it. So that, to me, that's really important. For people these are second language learners, and they speak it with each other. They've developed their relationship in Hawaiian. It's not an odd thing that they're doing. They're not making a special effort. That's their language together, and they look at that person's face, boom, Hawaiian. They don't think about English with those other speakers. If you're not fluent, use what you know. So that even the learners should be using Hawaiian to the extent that they can. And that happens quite a bit. And of course, these are things that can certainly apply in Alaska. Here's a big luau from the end of the Hawaiian Language College semester at the University of Hawaii Hilo. And you can't tell from looking at them, but they're all singing in Hawaiian. The women up front are doing the hula, the guys in the back are singing Hawaiian music. Music is a big thing in Hawaii. And I think it's very important to the language revitalization myself, because there's a lot of popular music performed in the language. One time I was at the supermarket, and I was wheeling my cart around, and for 45 minutes, all I heard coming over the loudspeaker were songs in the Hawaiian language. And so I thought, where else in the United States of America is this possible for an indigenous language? Probably nowhere. So where does all this music come from? It's not ancient traditional music. Those are chants. And you heard Graham Smith give a Maori chant, which is an ancient Polynesian chant style that also applies in Hawaii. But what happens now is that actually from American popular songs from the 1920s and 30s, the Hawaiians got inspired and came up with their own song styles, their own music, and their own lyrics in the Hawaiian language. And I think it's given a real shot in the arm to the language, because any of those singers, first you have to learn to pronounce the language, and we all know about that. You can learn to pronounce things in a language you don't know. But now the ante has been raised so that the performers need to actually speak the language. There are classes, it is possible. And so when they get interviewed on television and radio, they get interviewed in Hawaiian if they can do it. Let's see. Now we're dancing. Oh, that works. Okay, thank you. Another thing that's very important is making languages relevant to young people, and that's a real challenge in Alaska, of course, is not having our languages seen as languages of old people, right? It's not just the grandparents' language. It's supposed to be the kids' language. And so how have they done this? And I've said that there are all kinds of cultural things that go on in Hawaiian, including songs, crafts, and social benefits means that you get included in groups and you get social points for speaking the language. You are appreciated. You are given social status for knowing the language. Another thing they've done is actively recruiting young couples who know the language to use it at home with small children. I call them language missionaries, right? They're not promoting religion, they're promoting language. And when they know of people who speak the language and who are of childbearing age, they let you know that that would be a really good thing to do. And there are a number of people in Hawaii raising their children in the Hawaiian language. They're not afraid those kids aren't going to learn English, okay? And I think they've pretty much gotten rid of this idea that the language could hold them back. And we hear this in Alaska all the time, that somehow, the language, well, I don't know, it might hold you back from what you want to do, because of course we know about all the negativity that's happened in Alaska with punishment and other things. So they've gotten, the younger people don't have those ideas so much in Hawaii. The things that happened to the elders were very unfortunate, but the younger people have not really, have tried to get over that and see the language just really as a positive thing. I'll come to the end now. Let's see, so supporting factors for Hawaiian that are very different from Alaska. One, language. It's easily pronounceable for English speakers. It doesn't have the phonology of Tlingit or Alutiiq. It's quite a bit closer to English. Lots of old writing, daily presence of the language, music, place names, signs like this one. It's silly. It's just a tourist thing, but it's there. It's okay. You could say it's tokenism, but here's a sign in a tourist mall that says "Let's eat" in Hawaiian. So somehow the language is present. And then I remember this sign that I photographed on a highway. I thought I was a competent driver till I got onto that highway and found out that I couldn't read the signs. So I better go out and learn what that means. It means take care and don't use your engine brake in town, whatever that's about. But anyway, just to conduct your daily life in that state, you need a certain amount of the language. And that doesn't get you fluent Hawaiian, but it keeps the language in the forefront and in the minds of people. Relevance to Alaska, popular music is something we could do. There's some, I mentioned Pambioa, who sing in Yupik. I wish we had more like that. Native language signage, make the place names more prominent. The new Alaska Native Language Map has native place names. Use language with small children. There's a lot of emotion in Alaska over language suppression. And see, maybe that could be used to benefit the languages. I've had people tell me that a terrible wrong was done to us in our language, and I want to correct that wrong by teaching the language. That person's taking that history and maybe turning it into something positive. Okay, so that's the end of my talk.
Thank you very much. Our third and final panelist, April Canceller, Assistant Professor of Alutiiq Language and Culture at Kodiak College, will present Alutiiq Studies, Creation of a Program. Allow her to set up her computer.
Chamai, Hui April Lactonin Counselor, Aftahatna Ishik, Anaka Esther Furio, Litnoista East Elementary Me, Dadaka Jerry Lactonin, Mascalista, at Dachduk, Washington State Me. Wika Jeremy Counselor, Paniakka Emmy Chali Laura. I'm April Lactonin Counselor. My Alutiiq name is Ishik. My parents are Jerry Lactonin, who's a mask maker and lives in Washington State, and my mother, who is Esther Furio, and lives in Kodiak, working at East Elementary for at least a couple more months until she retires. I'm married to Jeremy Counselor and have two daughters, Emmy and Laura. I'm going to be talking about our new Alutiiq Studies and Student Support Project at Kodiak College today. When I got put onto this panel, I thought, oh no, my presentation isn't all about the Alutiiq language. It's not all about language, it's about this whole program we're creating. But in my mind, and in the minds of many people in our community, the development of this Alutiiq Studies program really is tied in with the language movement, and there's a lot of language-related activities that we are doing as part of this project, but it also encompasses sort of indigenizing the academy and sort of taking over little by little in order to make a place and carve out a place for our Native students at Kodiak College, because the Native student population at Kodiak College is increasing possibly faster than any of the other groups within our local branch of the University of Alaska Anchorage. So my presentation, most of it is going to be talking about the grant objectives, what are we actually doing, the nuts and bolts of the goals of the project, some of the initial successes that we have had. I started on this project one semester after it had already begun. And so I've been at the college for a little bit more than a year now. We're getting close to the end of the second year of the 5-year project, so I'll be talking about that. And then towards the end of my presentation, I'd like to sort of look back on the movement that led to this project and connect it back to the language revitalization movement and some of the issues that I'm facing when I think about sort of making this institution within an institution like Professor Smith was talking about this morning. So the Alutiiq Studies and Student Support Project is a 5-year project, like I mentioned, funded by the Department of Ed. It's a Title III program. The main goals of the project are to create an Alutiiq Studies program, and that involves both creating the classes as well as creating certificates, endorsements, and an AA degree in Alutiiq Studies, or whatever we're going to call it, because we haven't even decided on that yet. The types of courses that we are creating involve Alutiiq language, culture, policy, history, anything that we have identified that is of interest to the Native community in Kodiak. And I'm also trying to gather information at various community events of what do the tribal leaders and the corporate leaders in Kodiak want to see as far as education, both for Native students and for non-Native people who are coming into the community that might need an orientation to Alutiiq culture, Alutiiq language, or the history of ANCSA, things like that. We have a lot of people who staff our various tribes, Native organizations, and corporations that are not familiar with our way of life, and I'm seeing a real opening there for potential creation of classes that would serve those needs in the community. Another big aspect of the project is to improve Native student outcomes. We do have a problem with retention of Native students. Even though our population of Native students at Kodiak College is higher than the percentage of Native people in the community, that's not necessarily the end-all of the situation. We're not retaining those students semester to semester as well as we should, and we're not graduating them at the rates that we would like. We're also looking at faculty training in culturally relevant instruction, special methods of advising for Native students, and another way of bringing the culture to the campus. We're looking at different renovations. We've already renovated a couple of spaces. I'll talk about our signage project and creation of a gathering area, and also improvements in technology that we're working on the campus so that we can reach those Native students who might not actually live here or there in Kodiak. So the current staff on our project include myself. I'm the activity director for the project, as well as the assistant professor of Alutiiq language and culture at the college, which of course is a new position they created just for me. John Beal, who is the taller guy in the back there, he is the data collection assistant who helps with procurement and that kind of thing, and is also the distance ed technician. So he helps when we do the hybrid distance classes. I'm teaching, he's running the Skype session simultaneously for our distance students, and I'll describe that a little bit more. We also have Steve Roundsville, who's our Native student advocate. He worked in the Kodiak Island Borough School District in K-12 for many years and retired from that. And he has adopted a number of Native children. He's not Native himself, but he's very familiar with our community, and he has a really nice manner for dealing with Native students. So he's been working on our program for probably a little bit less than a year. And we've also had a job opening recently for the project director and grant admin, and we're hoping to have that filled maybe in a matter of days. So I'm really looking forward to having a full team going forward for the rest of this project. So since the Alutiiq language courses are sort of closest to my heart as far as the development and the instruction, I wanted to talk about those first. In my very first semester at the college, I developed an Alutiiq 101 class, an Alutiiq 102, Alutiiq orthography, and a Master Apprentice class, all of which we put through the UAB and got it onto the books through the University of Alaska. It's in the official catalog. It's not a special topics course or anything like that. We got all of those put through, and I immediately started with Alutiiq 101 last semester. So that was the first time we had a specific Alutiiq language class that was on the books, not as a special topic or pilot class. This semester I also offered Alutiiq 102, which is being offered hybrid. So the Alutiiq 101 class, we're starting to get it set up where the Alutiiq 101 will be offered in the fall and Alutiiq 102 will be offered in the spring, and then the Alutiiq orthography, the writing class, will be offered in the fall. So if we have a cohort of students that are going through the Alutiiq language endorsement, they can all go through together starting in the fall, continuing on through spring, and then into the next year with the orthography and other Alutiiq language or language acquisition and teaching classes that we're going to be developing. Alutiiq 101 is going to be offered as an online-only course beginning this fall, so that's going to be a big experiment for me. We've been offering it hybrid, where we have a face-to-face class and then we have a distance class. In 101, we met with those separately, so on Mondays I would meet with the face-to-face students. Tuesdays I would meet online with the distance students, and then on Wednesdays they would complete an online module that I created within Blackboard. And those of you who are in the UA system know all about Blackboard and how it has drawbacks, but it also is a good way to connect people, especially if people can't all meet at the same time. This next upcoming semester in the fall, since I'm going to be teaching the orthography class, I'm also going to be teaching a cultural orientation class. I didn't have enough time to teach a live class of Alutiiq 101, so we're taking the distance delivery to the next level and doing an asynchronous Alutiiq 101 class, which will be made up of individual modules that students will complete each week. These Department of Ed grant projects for projects like mine, they are designed to allow you to experiment, and it's not in my comfort area to do distance delivery of Alutiiq language. I've always been a face-to-face instructor, teaching over Skype or through Illuminate Live. It's really difficult, especially for those distance students who might need a little bit of extra help. And we are constantly learning. We're changing the way that we deliver these classes each semester. Last semester we primarily used Illuminate Live for the distance students, and that has a little whiteboard that you can write on, and you can do slideshows and that kind of thing. And you can do a little bit of limited video, but it's not that great. And to talk, you have to turn on your mic, and if the student wants to talk, then you have to turn your mic off and let them access the mic, and there's a lot of juggling going on throughout the class. So this semester we decided to have the distance students call in with Skype, which sort of simplifies things. It's just a direct video conference, and it allows them to call in from their homes or from anywhere, because not all of our distance students have access to a Polycom or a traditional video conferencing system. So if they had fast enough internet, they could call in with Skype. It hasn't been 100% seamless. We had a lot of students who were trying to call in using Wi-Fi at a coffee shop or things like that, and they wouldn't have a fast enough bandwidth. They'd be getting dropped out of the class. It's been sort of tough because I worry that our distance students might not get the same quality of education as our face-to-face students. And it is my goal that we can maximize the effectiveness of our distance delivery so that there isn't that much of a gap. Right now, since we're still learning, I do feel like there is a little bit of a gap. But because of the fact that these distance students now have access to learning the language, it's still worth it for them. Even though they sometimes have trouble calling in or they have a little bit of difficulty using the system, they would much prefer that than to not learn Alutiiq at all. In this past semester, we had one student that was calling in from Thailand when she was traveling. We have one student right now that is calling in weekly from Oregon. We have a couple of students in the Anchorage area, and 1 student in one of the villages on Kodiak Island, all calling in, while I also have about 6 students in the face-to-face class in Kodiak. So it's definitely a lot to keep in the air at the same time, and it's really nice to have my distance ed support tech to help keep everything moving smoothly. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the faculty training that we're working on. We did one training in the last grant year for the faculty about culturally responsive teaching, native ways of knowing, but I think that we still have a long ways to go. We're starting to offer special stipends for course development for instructors who want to modify existing syllabi to reflect native ways of knowing, or to become more place-based and focus on Alutiiq history in addition to some of the other things that they're teaching. So that's one of the things we're working on. We're going to be doing a full day-long training at the end of this semester for the faculty who are interested in becoming more culturally responsive. We also have an initiative to create a Native student advising model that might actually have a lot of overlaps with traditional advising models, but would also incorporate some of those special issues that Native students face, to make sure that our faculty are aware that, you know, maybe the student is not disinterested, maybe they actually don't have a place to live right now because they're supposed to be living with their cousins and there's something dysfunctional going on there, or you know, they feel like they have a real strong responsibility to their community and therefore they have to go back home this semester. You know, explaining some of those personal stories that we hear because we're in the Native community, but that the rest of the faculty might not be aware about. And also for those faculty who are interested in learning more about the Alutiiq culture and language, that's another option for them. I do have one staff member who informed me that they signed up for my Alutiiq cultural orientation class this fall, so I'm really excited about that. That class is going to be covering, actually I'm going to talk about that next. I'll go on to the next slide. So the Alutiiq cultural orientation class is a class that I'm really excited about, and I'm just in the beginning stages of getting that class designed. But that course is going to be almost where I'm just more of a facilitator, and we're going to be having elders coming in on a weekly basis to tell stories about their own history and to incorporate archaeological information, historical information, some Alutiiq language. We're also going to be bringing in Alutiiq artists so that our students will be working on creating a salmon skin pouch while they're learning about the ethnographic collections that they have in Finland. So I'm really excited about the sort of multimodal aspects of the class that we're creating and how it's going to be a real collaboration with members of the community. Another really interesting thing that I'm noticing is that we're creating these brokered classes. A lot of our tribes, they have, you know, they'll get a grant to do a 8-week workshop on how to make an Alutiiq beaded headdress. Well, how come those students aren't getting college credit for that? All they have to do is pay $40. If I go through the paperwork, they can get brokered college credit for going to these things that they were already going to. And these instructors in the community who might have felt valued by their tribe because they were asked to teach this, now they're like, oh, I'm an instructor at Kodiak College. And it's giving them a level of status that they didn't realize that they had before. So right now, this semester, just 2 different workshops that popped up. We were able to offer an Alutiiq mask making class as a brokered class and a headdress making class. And now that we have those people in the system, we can also bring them in for other regular classes through the college. So I'm excited about those developments. Another class that we're going to be offering this fall is Alutiiq literature, taught by Alicia Draybeck. She did her dissertation just recently on this topic, compiling different oral histories and examining the cultural values that are embedded in those. And I'm really excited about that class as well. She's going to be teaching that hybrid, so people who don't live in Kodiak are also able to take that. The cultural orientation class is actually the only one that's not going to be available to distant students yet, and that's because of the hands-on nature of some of the sewing projects and things that we're going to be doing. But it's possible that that might be offered in the future as well. And I want to talk about why we're offering some of these, or most of these classes as hybrid or distance classes. Kodiak is very small. Our communities are isolated. If we want this Alutiiq Studies program to become institutionalized and to become a permanent program after this grant ends, we need to build up our student numbers and make sure that all the people who are interested in taking the class can take the class, even if they don't live in Kodiak. If we limited all of our classes to those people who reside in Kodiak, I don't know. I think Alutiiq 101 might go, but I'm not sure about Alutiiq 102, and I'm not sure about the orthography class. Actually, I'm certain the orthography class wouldn't go. And I like to joke around with people about the orthography class because I'm really excited about the Alutiiq writing system now that I've written a book on it with Jeff Lear. I don't know how this happened, but I'm a real nerd for the Alutiiq writing system now, and I always joke with people about how exciting this class is going to be and how much fun we're going to have learning about gemination and that kind of thing. But it will be offered, and it will be offered by distance. In the following spring of 2014, we're starting to design a Native policy and political history type class, starting with the formation of the Alaska Native Brotherhood all the way through ANCSA up until today. We had a lot of people interested in learning about ANCSA, but we didn't want to just kind of compartmentalize it and just learn about ANCSA in the 70s. We wanted to learn about, what movements led up to that, what has happened since then, what is happening now. There's been a lot of changes since the 70s, and especially some of the things that are happening in our region right now. We're having a lot of transition, things are happening. The way that our corporation is running now is a lot different than it was in the past, and we want people to be educated about that, especially people who didn't grow up in Kodiak. We have a lot of people who move to Kodiak and they're totally confused about the governance structure of the Native community. They're like, okay, you've got the tribal council, the village corporation, the regional corporation, the municipality, the borough, the housing authority, the regional nonprofit, the regional educational institutions. And people just get really kind of confused, and they kind of just block it out because they don't feel like it's something that's accessible to them. So I'm hoping that some of these classes will help change that. And we're also looking into other cultural and brokered courses that we want to start offering every semester, at least one Alutiiq arts class, at least one Alutiiq language class, and another class related to policy or governance. So the Alutiiq Student Services, as I mentioned, our Native student advocate is Steve Rounsaville. He's working on tracking our Native students. He's selected a group of our core Native students who are full-time or who are taking any of the classes that we are sponsoring through the Alutiiq Studies Project, and he's tracking them. He's following up on them one-on-one. If I call him and say, oh look, this one student, she missed a couple of classes, I think she might be struggling, I don't want her to have to withdraw, he'll follow up individually with that student and say, is there anything we can do to help? I noticed that your grade might not be high enough this semester in order to qualify you for a scholarship next semester. If we do this, can we get your grade up? If your grade is still low at the end of the semester, can I help? Can I call the scholarship? He's called a number of the Native scholarship entities and advocated on behalf of these students to say, don't cut off the scholarship funding. It was his first semester, he was overwhelmed, he just came in from the village, but based on the meetings that I've had with this student, I think he can succeed and I think you should continue funding him. I think it has really helped. We don't have enough data right now, and our sample, of course, is very small. But I think that this one-on-one tracking of Native students is really starting to help. And of course, a lot of what we are doing is not things that we're inventing on our own. Steve traveled to the UAA campus, the UAF campus. We traveled to Hawaii to find out what they're doing there at the University of Hawaii Hilo to serve their Native students better. And we're trying to implement these things so we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're also trying to modify it for our specific regional environment. Because Kodiak Island, although it's an island, it's not exactly the same as the Big Island of Hawaii. We have locally specific characteristics that need to be addressed. We have a resident advisor initiative of this grant, which is funny because we don't have a residence hall at Kodiak College. But the reason that this was put into the project is because we have such a problem with housing for our students. Our Native students from the villages, they'll come into Kodiak and they'll be expected to live with an aunt or a cousin or something. These people aren't going to school. They don't necessarily know how to support these students. Sometimes there might be alcohol involved. Sometimes they might be trying to get their own place, but the housing costs in Kodiak are astronomical. I think they're some of the highest in the whole state. And so a lot of our Native students, when they do drop out, this is one of the reasons they say that they don't really have adequate housing. So we have partnered with the Kodiak Island Housing Authority to work with some of their programs to help address some of these issues for our Native students. We're also working on a mentorship and tutoring program. We just hired our first Native student mentor, who is also in the Alutiiq language class, but she is more of an upperclassman. Actually, she's going to be starting a second master's program through UAF pretty soon. And we're really excited about her being able to help her fellow students through the Alutiiq language class. And she's actually residing in one of the villages, so she meets with students by Skype in order to help them study and to practice some of the language activities with them. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the physical improvements that we're doing on the Kodiak College campus. This is a view of the Alutiiq Studies Room, which is sort of my little territory that I've carved out on the campus. And a few of the people here are smiling and nodding that have actually been in this room. It's a really nice gathering space. And there's one of the problems that Kodiak College campus has is that we're really short on space. Even though certain spaces were promised in this grant, like we're going to make a classroom, we're going to make a recording studio, we're going to do a gathering area. Well, once we got the grant, we're like, oh no, how are we going to actually carve out all these spaces within the institution? So this is what the first room we've actually modified, and that gray thing in the corner with the window, that is our portable, quote unquote portable, it's not that portable, but it's a recording studio that people can come in, record Alutiiq language, and we could use those for the online portions of the courses that we're developing. We're also able to let people from the community come in and make recordings. So we have tribal entities who are sending people in to record Alutiiq language samples so that they can put it onto their website or their online dictionary project. So this room has been used as a classroom, as a small meeting room, as a recording studio. We've got this great wall-to-wall mural on one wall. You can see a portion of it there that has scenes from Kodiak Island. And we're actually looking at our next room now. We're going to be creating one of the larger classrooms into a gathering space, which won't be reserved just for Alutiiq studies. It'll be used for a yoga studio, just like it currently is, and for staff meetings. But it'll put the stamp of Alutiiq culture on more walls of the college, and I think it'll really create a nice presence. Another big project that took us over a year to complete was the signage project. As part of this grant, we decided we wanted to make multilingual signage for the entire campus, which sounded great. We didn't realize how difficult it was going to be, even to get the Russian language, which we have quite a few Russian language speakers in Kodiak, but to find people who are willing to translate, especially things like, you know, copy machine room and and custodial closet, things like that. I actually had to have a number of meetings with the Alutiiq New Words Council to develop new words for some of these rooms because we didn't have actual words for them. So this is one of the larger signs we created for the student services area. And about a week after we got all the signs put up around campus, I realized that we didn't put Alutiiq first. It was just one of those random things. I didn't even notice. We put Spanish first, which is great, but with our Alutiiq Studies program, we should have probably put Alutiiq first. But there was a spreadsheet. It got sent off to the printer. We didn't pay attention. Anyway, so we have the English, Spanish, Alutiiq, Filipino, and then Russian, as well as Braille on all of these signs. And this is the only campus that we know of. If anyone does know of any other campuses around the country that has this number of languages on all of their signs, please let me know because I would love to know about it. It was a pretty big achievement that we were able to get this to happen. It took a lot of work from a lot of people, and I'm really proud of that, one of those initial accomplishments. Another thing that we're doing a lot of, at least a couple of times per semester, is having special language gatherings and trainings. We've had Evan Gardner of Where Are Your Keys, which is a language learning method. He's been back to Kodiak now about 3 times. He's done a number of language workshops with us, and that has been a real big driver of our language in the past year or so. It's gotten a lot of excitement from people, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at the end. We also recently held an ACTFL assessment training. That's the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, which was a really great training and taught us a lot about assessing people's oral proficiency through an interview process. And we'd used the ACTFL standard for years in Kodiak, and I think a lot of Native groups around the state, they talk about ACTFL, oh, are you novice, intermediate, advanced? But hardly anyone has received this training. I don't know if we've ever had a training like this in the state. And once you actually have the training, you realize, oh my gosh, I was using that model so incorrectly. My understanding of that model was so basic and minimum. And now that we've gone through this training, we want to try to encourage more trainings like this to occur around the state, because although it's an assessment method, it's also another way of understanding language acquisition, and also gives you some ideas. It's not a teaching method, but it does also give you some ideas about structuring a language lesson. Another thing that's really important to our project is community involvement. We have a Fluent Elders Council that advises the project. Basically, they say, everything you do is great, April. But I still try to share with them what we're doing. We make sure that the elders feel welcome on campus. They really like the Alutiiq Studies Room. Before I came onto the campus and worked for this project, I didn't see elders here very often. The Kodiak College has really been supportive of the Native community and allows things like the Regional Rural Forum to meet on campus. And so, you know, a couple times a year there would be large groups of Native people that would come onto the campus and they would feel welcome. But on a daily basis, you wouldn't see a lot of Alutiiq elders wandering around. And I'm hoping to try to change that through our project. We also have a lot of community partners, such as the Alutiiq Museum, some of the tribes, especially Native Village of Afognak, who are creating materials and sponsoring events, and we're partnering on a lot of these events so that we can share resources and make sure that we're all on the same page. Because as the Alutiiq language movement has grown, there are more people involved, and it's really easy for us to start doing our own thing in our different part of the community. And we don't want that to happen. We want to maintain these open lines of communication between our different organizations. And it really, really has helped. For a while there, after the Alutiiq Museum's language program started to kind of dissipate because of funding issues, and we had other organizations in the community starting to do language programs, we weren't always communicating. We weren't always on the same page. And we didn't always get along. There's dialectical issues that happen in Kodiak. And we struggled for a while there because of funding, because of politics, because of dialect. All of these things, they can really easily get in the way of what you're trying to do. And especially when we started thinking about creating an Alutiiq Studies program at the college, we needed to all be on board and to be working together. And I was really appreciative of the representatives from the college. And this is back when I was still working at the Alutiiq Museum. They would come to the Regional Language Advisory Committee. They would actually come to all of our meetings and they would listen. And it was based on what people were saying at those meetings that the initial ideas for this Alutiiq Studies program began to develop. And so, you know, that's something that I have to make sure to mention, because these are not Native people that initially got this grant to be written. It was people who were just willing to listen, to be involved, and were in line with what was needed by the Native community. And they were willing to put Kodiak College out there and say, we're willing to take this risk. It took the whole faculty of Kodiak College to agree that, yes, we will go along with this project, even though it requires additional commitments from us. So this is kind of the last portion of my presentation. I wanted to talk about, you know, how did we actually get to this point where an Alutiiq Studies program was both wanted and possible. When I was in high school, I don't think Kodiak College was really much on the map. The idea of an Alutiiq Studies program, no one ever even talked about it because we weren't there as a community yet. I think a lot of it ties back to the language movement, and our language movement is pretty young. We really only started about 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago if you count the early parts of 2002 when we very first got our first planning grant at the Alutiiq Museum. There were a few starts and stops earlier in the 90s, but things weren't really on a progressive path until just the past couple of years. We had a number of projects at the Alutiiq Museum, great successes. We won all sorts of awards. We did the Master Apprentice model. We had Leanne Hinton come up to Kodiak her very self and lead the training herself. Wow, she's like a celebrity. We had some great successes. We created curriculum. We developed lesson plans. We made songs. We did all these translations. But at the end of that Master Apprentice project, at the end of the project that came after that, how many fluent speakers did we develop over about 9 years? If you count me, maybe 2? It kind of depends on what your definition of fluent is. And sometimes I don't even myself feel that I have that advanced fluency, but for social reasons, I can't go back on it now. The community expects me to have that advanced fluency, so I have to have that advanced fluency. And we have a couple of other people now that are coming up, but we got to this level where we had these intermediate speakers, we had a few advanced speakers, But we were putting all of our money into these curriculums and these magic bullets where how are we going to teach a language? Well, TPR, that's what we're going to do this year. Oh, we're going to create this immersion curriculum, but because we don't have enough teachers, we're going to make recordings of every single sentence that they need to utter during the class, and then put it on CDs, and then send it out to all the schools where we don't have any native speakers to teach. And I can tell you all those curriculums are sitting in boxes, and I started feeling this frustration. We had grants that weren't getting funded, the museum's language program was starting to falter, but yet at the same time we had a growing capacity in the community to start administering additional programs. Other organizations were getting interested, and I think that was sort of the fertile ground that led to this new Alutiiq Studies project. As far as that happening, we've also changed our direction with language teaching. One of the things that I used to always say when people said, what is your goal for the Alutiiq language? When are you going to know that you were successful? And I would say, well, and this is always hard to talk about because you have these utopian dreams. Everyone in the whole community will be learning and teaching Alutiiq and speaking it in the grocery store. Well, I knew that that wasn't going to happen, so I'd say, well, I know that we will be a success when anyone that wants to learn Alutiiq will have access to it. And then I'd feel sort of like, man, that is the lamest goal I've ever heard, because it's not very innovative and it's not a very strong goal. Now when people ask me that, I say that my goal for the Alutiiq language is that everyone is going to want to learn. Because if you really want to learn, nothing is going to hold you back. The Master Apprentice model, it's great, but it has a really low success rate because so many of the people that are involved in Master Apprentice, they want to learn, but they don't want to learn desperately enough that nothing will hold them back. Through some of these new methods that we are using, we're attending to the whole community. We're attending to people's needs for closure about some of the intergenerational trauma that they have faced. We're angeling each other, which is a technique from the Where Are Your Keys method, where we don't let people stress about the language. We don't let people feel shame. When you feel shame about the language, it's like guilt. It's the most ineffective type of feeling that you can have as far as getting things done. When you feel guilty, and I felt so guilty for so long about the language that I wasn't teaching it to Emmy. I wasn't teaching enough people. I wasn't learning fast enough. And when you feel those feelings of guilt, it paralyzes you. You don't get anywhere. And so some of these new ways that we're looking at the language are sort of trying to turn that around, and people are not feeling so guilty anymore. They're feeling excited. The Alutiiq language is now this exclusive club that we're texting each other in Alutiiq. We have a Facebook page. And if you don't know Alutiiq, you want to know Alutiiq because you want to know what these people are saying to each other. Why do they think it's so funny? What are all those little smiley faces about? What are they saying? People now are wanting to learn Alutiiq, and that is the biggest change that has happened in our community. For the longest time, we were paying people to learn Alutiiq, and we're like, why are they not learning? Well, some of our learners are still getting paid to learn Alutiiq, but many other people, they're coming of their own accord because they just want to learn and they're not going to let anything hold them back. So we're changing this model from this empty vessel, like let me pour language on you, let me teach you and teach you and teach you. If that is the method you're using, it's not going to work. With very small children, because they're more like sponges, if you pour it on them, they will soak it up. But with an adult, if you're using this empty vessel model, it's not going to work. It's going to drain back out until you get that person so passionate about learning the language that they won't stop at anything, and they won't let funding, and they won't let people's perceptions get in the way. So I think I'm done with my rant now. But I am really encouraged by what's happening in the Kodiak community, and I'm really excited to be here at this conference to find out what is happening in other parts of the state. And I'm excited to be part of the Language Council to learn more on a statewide level about what people are doing and to be able to share what I'm learning with other people. So, Juliana, for your attention today, and here's the required last slide. There's my contact information.
We have about 12 minutes. If anyone has a question for either Professor Twitchell, Professor Lawrence or Counselor. Oh, where did Lance go? Oh, there he is. Please go ahead and speak to whoever you'd like to ask a question.
April. Yes, Jemai. Hi. From living in Kodiak and stuff, and being there from 04 to 07, I'm just curious. I'm really interested to find out how much this language program has inspired people to kind of like, how much has language and culture kind of like spilled into the public atmosphere in Kodiak? Has it inspired people to be a little bit, you know, to bring it out and be proud of it in public, and, you know, more than just the Awakening Bear ceremony, I think, that was there.
Yeah, which doesn't happen anymore. But
yeah.
Well, I would say that with the place that the language movement is in now, there is more presence of just general community members that aren't part of the Native community that are starting to come to these gatherings because it's fun. Like some of the, yeah, we're having, there's a lot more. We have the Alutiiq Language Club, there's a community language night. So we do have people in the general community now that are becoming more interested in the language. We don't yet have as much spilling out, like, you know, we got one street name in Alutiiq, Alimak Drive, but we haven't yet succeeded to that level where it's everywhere in the community, and I think that is going to be really helpful. You know, when we look at what they have in Hawaii, where you have almost, you know, you see all these street signs in the language, you hear people on the radio, just, you know, non-native people who are just dropping native words into their everyday speech because it's so ever-present. We're definitely not there yet. But that's one of the next steps, I think, is to make the wider community see the value of the language, not just for tourism, but for, you know, for the whole sense of community unity, that it's something that we all should be proud of, not just the Native community.
Thank you. Congratulations on all your success.
Thank you.
Just in the back there.
More a comment than a question. It strikes me, having listened to Graham Smith this morning, having sat and listened to the Language Council this afternoon, and now these three excellent presentations this afternoon, that there's clearly a theme that's going through that's not really being highlighted terribly strongly, or at least not this afternoon terribly strongly, and that's the relationship between language programming and self-determination. I think Dr. Kaplan could have, of course, highlighted some of the educational history in Hawaii and the role of the Aha Punana Leo in creating its own educational system, the role of the university in creating its own teacher education system for the Aha Punana Leo programs, that sort of marriage between, in my opinion, that marriage between self-determination, sovereignty, whatever vocabulary word you want to use, and language programming really is the underpinning of such real success. And it's there, I think, in embryonic form in the Alutiiq Studies program. I certainly hear it coming from Lance, and it's a role that I think the Language Council really needs to think long and deeply about how to, and as I understand it, your first goal is to look at state legislation. And in looking at state legislation, I'd encourage you to think about how to foster that native control of education through language programming. Because language programming is one thing that linguists may appear to be taking control of, but nobody outside the community can take control of that. That is precisely why language becomes such a key element, I think, in the Hawaiian movement, why it is such a key element in the Maori movement, because it's part and parcel of the community, and it is a place to begin that self-determination struggle, or to perhaps further that self-determination struggle. So that's my piece.
Well, I would respond and say there's no self-determination like speaking your own language. Nothing will match it. Nothing at all. One of the big problems that I often think about is at the time our languages were replaced with English, it was a different brand of English as well. It was a language that just, it hated us. And so we lose our language, and then you insert a language that's full of it becomes self-hatred, and you're stuck in this loop. So not only does it philosophically get you sort of out of that, even though we speak a different brand of English, now I think those power structures still remain. I think one thing I've really encouraged the Language Council, you guys would have your work cut out for you, but there should be 22 official languages of the state of Alaska, and the overwhelming minority language would be English. You want to really frighten people, you tell them they're going to become minorities, and then you say, oh, you think it's a bad thing? You think you get treated bad? But I think that would be a fantastic thing, is to say all of these languages are the official languages of the state, and that could open the door for education to take an honest look at what it's doing by keeping languages out of the regular curriculum set. So yeah, those are great points. And I think that's what it comes down to, is it's the ultimate form of self-determination. That's all we have to do is speak. That's all we have.
Well, maybe one last question.
Larry and everyone else, I wonder how you would compare the Hawaiian situation with a state that has one indigenous language, to the Alaskan situation, where we have 20-some indigenous languages. So what are going to be the differences for us here in Alaska compared to what we see as this overwhelming success in Hawaii and New Zealand?
Yeah, well, it really comes from the communities. It depends what their goals are for their language, and they're going to determine that. I mean, that's how the Hawaiian thing came apart. So that means, I think that it would all look rather different. I don't think every language in Alaska has exactly the same goals, from what I hear.
Well, I don't really mean that. I'm thinking about how there's one state, and the Hawaiians deal with one language with one state. So will there need to be a unity among the languages in going to the state?
The unity can come from planning together, I think, for individual languages. That's what's going to have to happen, and that's where the Language Council comes into it. I would say you could speak to that if you want.
Yeah, I think there's a big potential for the State Language Council to assist in that, because it's true, when you have this number of languages like we do in Alaska, the immediate worry is, resources. How are we going to make this happen when there are so many different languages that need attention, and so many different languages that need materials developed, and if we're going to go the next step after making them official languages, then what is that going to look like when we're all, at this point we're all in competition for funding sources and that kind of thing. And it's not all about funding, but it does affect how things happen on the ground when there isn't enough to go around as far as that is concerned. So I'm hoping that our Language Council will be able to help facilitate some of those issues, because that is our, even though we represent our own individual languages, we're also there for all the other languages that don't have a seat on the council. There's only 5 of us, so we have to take that broader view.
And I think one of the things we could do as well is look at who's in charge of names of places, because in Hawaii the names are everywhere. And I'm pretty sure that there's some, either if there's not legislation, then there's a strong encouragement that if it's hard to pronounce, we're not going to name it that. But in Hawaii, a friend of mine told me a story. He said when he first moved there, he gets in the cab and he says, I'm trying to go to blank place, and he mispronounces it, and he gets the $100 tour of the island. And that's what I want. That's, if you get in the cab and you can't say I'm going to Tanti Kahini Drive, then I want that cab driver to rip you off. So these are things so that the language is everywhere. And now all these people, they know the language. It's not unfamiliar to them. It's not scary, because it's part of our daily conversation, and it helps tie people to where they are. Because who cares about Mendenhall or Haynes or all these other people that may or may not even been there? It doesn't mean anything, but within our place names we find the reasons why we went to these places and the things that we found there. and we can reattach ourselves regardless of where you're from through places.
I think we'll end it there. I mean, great conversations, fantastic panels and presentations, and thank you all for coming.